Washington left no doubt. So the Huskies are in the college football playoff safe and secure as one of two undefeated teams in the playoff. Of course, that's the controversy that ensues across the nation, but Washington with a date against Texas for a second consecutive year. This one a little bit more meaningful. Got Lars Hansen here. Locked On Huskies podcast is where you can join him. Lars, how you doing today?
Good, Mark. Always great to be on with you.
Yeah, thanks for stopping by. And this Washington team, of course, the talk going into the Pac-12 championship game was, although they had stayed undefeated, was a team that wasn't quite the same team and showing the same level of play since the big Oregon win in Seattle, thus a 9.5-point underdog against the team that they had already defeated. A lot of people were on the Ducks train of them going on to the college football playoff. So let me ask you this right out of the gate. What was different about Washington in the Pac-12 championship game?
The line of scrimmage, it showed up on both sides of the ball. And I think we expected that on the offensive line. The offensive line for the most part had been pretty well protecting Michael Penix, but the defensive line had kind of been hit or miss. I mean, Oregon was able to run through them the first time, and last year was the same case. And pretty much every team, with the exception of one or two, but for the most part, we're usually able to get 100 yards rushing against Washington. Yes, Oregon did that in the Pac-12 championship game, but half of that came on the legs of Bo Nix. So the fact that Washington was able to shut down Jordan James and Bucky Irving and really disrupt the Oregon offensive line from a number of different ways really kind of set that tone early, because it wasn't just Washington scoring on that first drive. It was the fact that Oregon went three and out. It was like Oregon just couldn't get in sync early. And that was the key for Washington, because had they had to go blow for blow, maybe Oregon edges them out towards the end late, especially when they went on that 21-0 run. But the offensive line, the defensive line, that line of scrimmage battle was not close. Even though the score was still a 3-point game at the end, it was more indicative of the 17-3, 20-3, 2010 first half that came to fruition.
Lars, how much of that performance had to do with this team being healthier than it's been for quite a long time?
Significantly. I think that was without question. Tuli Tuligasino, senior defensive lineman, played 5 snaps against Washington State in the Apple Cup, mainly because of a scheme, but he was still also working back from an injury and some things like that. And on the offensive line, I think the offensive line for the most part had been healthy. They just kind of hadn't, I don't want to say they hadn't played up to their potential, but I guess that's kind of what you would have to call it. And this certainly the past couple of weeks where, I mean, Washington State was able to get a little bit of pressure. Oregon State obviously got pressure, but I think it was more so the defensive line being healthy and kind of showing as much as they could, because without the defensive line performance and Oregon running the ball, that's a much different game. So I think the healthier side on the defensive line kind of won the day in the end.
There are going to be weeks and weeks to prepare for this matchup and slice it up from a number of different perspectives and matchups. How did this one initially hit you, Texas-Washington?
Well, I mean, it was kind of fitting. As you mentioned, they faced off in the Alamo Bowl last season as one of the only, I believe, top 20 matchup last season that wasn't a New Year's Six matchup. And it kind of seemed like last season, this game probably should have been a New Year's Six, but because Washington had a couple losses and Texas also had a couple of losses, it was knocked down, rightly so. But this season, both teams have made improvements. I think Quinn Ewers certainly has gotten better. So I'm curious to see also. The other part of last season was there was opt-outs for Texas, right? This season, when you're playing for a national championship, you're playing in the college football playoff, you're not going to have guys opting out. Guys that are hitting the transfer portal weren't going to play in this game anyways, for both sides, right? Texas, I know, had a defensive back transfer. Washington had a safety transfer yesterday. Neither of those two I would expect would have played in the game anyways. So I think any defections or any players that don't play in this game will be because they probably weren't going to anyways. I don't want to speak for Texas, but that would just be my glean from it. But I do also think that this is a true test for Washington, where you're coming in again as underdogs. Texas is the perception is Texas has the better talent, especially across the line of scrimmage with their offensive line. But yet when you start to look into the matchup, Texas has given up twice as many sacks as Washington has in a conference that I don't think is great defensively. And granted, the Pac-12 certainly not great defensively either. But if you're choosing between the Big 12 and the Pac-12 for which one has the better defensive players, I think the edge slightly goes to the Pac-12. So the fact that Texas gave up that number of sacks, it opens the door for Washington if they can repeat that performance that they had against Oregon. Braylon Trice in his final game, likely at Washington off the edge. And this is also going to be a number of guys' final game at Washington, so they have everything to play for this season against Texas. So it's a fantastic matchup, and I think if Washington's being honest, they would rather avoid Alabama and Michigan and take this matchup with Texas. And then winner goes on for the national championship, and you got to take your lumps anyways.
Yeah, there is certainly, it's more than a perception, it's a reality, but how it comes to fruition certainly changes and depends on coaching and development and a lot of things. But that there are basically 3 programs in the country, and then I'll tack on Texas as a 4th and a few others that are close that just they recruit up here. And then you've got a line with the Penn States and the Notre Dames and the Washingtons of the world where there's a drop off. But how does that really relate to the field and translate to the field if you can make that up in coaching, scheme, development, all those other things? So do you really anticipate being able to, watch this game and see that, okay, Washington's got to be able to keep up in these areas from a talent perspective?
I think that you hit it on the nail with the coaching, where for whatever lack of talent Washington might have, or at least the edge going to Texas in that regard, I think Washington has proven in the last 24 months under Kalen DeBoer that they have the better coaching and they can get more out of their players. I mean, if you go back and watch the Alamo Bowl last season, the amount of drops Xavier Worthy had, Texas probably should have won that game. And there's a few other plays that can go here and there. And Washington has been able to put their players, and again, I know the season always hasn't looked great, especially Arizona State and things like that. But Washington's coaches have been able to put their players in a position where no matter what, even if you're trailing, they've never trailed by more than 7 points. So they're not in over their skis as a coaching staff. And I think that's pretty telling to where if you're looking at, okay, well, this guy's a 3-star going against 5-star Kelvin Banks or going against all these big, massive offensive linemen for Texas. Well, Washington has shown they can find ways to scheme with turbo packages and 4 edge rushers at the same time along the defensive line. So my concern is still going to be in the secondary, but I think kind of going back to an earlier question, Cameron Fabiculon is back healthy. Asa Turner was able to play in the championship game. So pretty much everybody that Washington is going to count on as a contributor is back on defense. Offense is they're already healthy, but defensively is going to be the key in this game because Texas, Quinn Ewers and Michael Penix can go for a shootout. It's again, who can make the one defensive stop? Can Braylon Trice beat his guy? Can Jabbar Muhammad make a play in the secondary? Those are going to be the key factors that end up separating this game at the end of the day.
When we look at this program, and of course, Kalen DeBoer is doing an outstanding job, but this is his first big program. He did a nice job in a brief stay at Fresno State. So there's always that thought that is this just a team that came together? Or is this something that's going to stay? Is this a program that's going to be able to replicate this? And I don't want to downgrade Washington in any way. The history shows us that Washington can compete at a national level when things are right. Does it appear as though this is just a tremendous collection of players that Kalen DeBoer largely inherited and was able to coach up, or that he is building something that moving into the Big Ten is going to be able to be sustained?
I believe he's building it to where it'll be sustained in the Big Ten. Now, are they at the Michigan level in terms of talent, to your point? Maybe not so across the board, right, at every single position. But I think with the transfer portal, Will Rogers sounds like he's going to come from Mississippi State to Washington. So the quarterback fall off won't be as far as, if you're going to Austin Mack or Will Haskell as kind of maybe lower tier guys. And Austin Mack is obviously a talented player, but he's going to be, I believe, just turning 18 next year. So I'm not necessarily sure from a coaching perspective, if you want to go from Michael Penix, Heisman finalist, to redshirt freshman, 18-year-old Austin Mack, when you can get guys in the transfer portal, build up your roster, and still bring along guys to develop. And, I'm sure, and I fully believe that Kalen DeBoer can get a number of recruits to do that. But I think his big addition is going to be from the transfer portal to kind of continue to bridge the sustainability, because I think from a culture perspective, absolutely Kalen DeBoer is going to be a staying power in the Big Ten. Now it's just a matter of, are they above Penn State or below Penn State, or are they right? The top four or the top five in the Big Ten next year: Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Washington, Oregon. I don't know necessarily if USC will be up there like many people think, but again, that's what the transfer portal does, right? It allows teams to offset the potential losses of players with instant impact in the portal. But to your point and to your question, Kalen DeBoer's ability to coach and develop, along with Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, Chuck Morrell and William Means, the co-defensive coordinators. I think there's a number of different positions that they will continue to get better at under Kalen DeBoer. And so I think certainly this season is probably like a peak, right? This is kind of like the dream scenario for Kalen DeBoer, right? Where you get Michael Penix and the entire offense back for another year, add Dylan Johnson from Mississippi State at running back. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a massive, like they're not going to be 8-4 next year. Like it would be a very big surprise if Washington falls from 13-0 to 8-4, right? I could see them being 10-2. Kind of 10-2 is where I would say Kalen DeBoer's bar is, and then where they go up or down from there is just a matter of who can they get year in and year out, both in recruiting and in the portal.
You mentioned the possibility that Will Rogers lands in Seattle. Here's a guy that thrived, of course, under Mike Leach. And if you look at his career just statistically, it's one of the most prolific careers in the history of college football. That may surprise some people, but go look at the numbers. Now, he suffered this year from a number of situations, of course, starting with the untimely passing of Mike Leach. And so you take away the guy that's the architect of the air raid, probably a guy that very much had an impact on Will Rogers, his development, his ability to continue to game plan and approach each and every game, because Mike Leach was almost a one of a kind. And then they try to fit him into more of a pro style run oriented offense. They had defections and injuries and things go wrong. So they go from 9-4 to a 5-win team. He gets hurt, doesn't have the kind of year that he was accustomed to, but he's a very, obviously it's a quarterback friendly system that he finds in Seattle. So that looks to be a big fit. He's not a huge talent in terms of like a high ceiling guy, but in terms of a guy that you can depend on making the right read, going to the right receiver, he's the guy.
Yeah, he's more Jake Haener than he is Michael Penix, where they can both execute that DeBoer Ryan Grubb offense. And I mean, Jake Haener still ended up being a 4th, 5th round pick in the NFL. So I think there's certainly no doubt that Rodgers would be the perfect 1-year bridge gap to then Austin Mack in 2025, or whoever they end up going in 25. But I think certainly the production that he's had, when you put the right talent around him, the question will be, can Washington's offensive line be as strong next year if they lose, Roger Rosengard, the right tackle, Troy Fatano, the left guard or the left tackle, is certainly gone to the NFL after the season. Parker Brailsford will be back, but then there's a number of guys they might have to replace. So how much of that will impact Rodgers' success? But I think certainly he'll have more talent, and I don't mean to take a shot at Mississippi State's coaches, but certainly better coaching on the offensive side of the ball at Washington should he end up in Seattle, which it's not official, but I would be very surprised at this point if Will Rogers doesn't end up in purple and gold.
Lars Hansen, Locked On Huskies podcast. Please join Lars right there. You see his handle on X. And so check out his work as we all prepare for Texas and Washington in less than 4 weeks. Lars, we appreciate you stopping by. Would love to get you back here in a couple of weeks, break down National Signing Day and give maybe a closer look at all the matchups across the board.
Absolutely. I'm here for it.